everybody. Um, we are just waiting for everybody to come in. Welcome to the Noon Book Club. We're really delighted to have Jenny Knight with us today. Lots of you will have read her amazing book. I've got the original proof copy, While We're Rising. Jenny's got the posh looking hardback. I think I need to get my hands on one of those. Um, but we're really delighted to have Jenny with us this evening. Actually think probably of all the books that we've done in the book club, this one feels particularly kind of queenager and noon appropriate. So I'm sure lots of you have got some good questions, and hopefully you've really enjoyed reading it. And while we get some new, while some more people kind of come in, because I realise we're only just at kind of past, we will we'll kind of do a few pleasantries. Remember, we're really delighted to take your we're really delighted to take your questions and put them in the chat, and we'll try and do that. And tell us where you are as well. It's good to know where you are and where you're joining us from. And we'd also really like to know what you thought of the book. This is Jenny's first novel. Ah, Jennifer's joining from Dulwich. Well done, Jennifer. I am joining from Kentish Town in North London. I was just saying that I've got a whole house full of Devon relations who have come to see us. They're going to see some marching bands or something down in Tower Hamlets tomorrow because their brother is over from America. So it's one of those times when you've got like many relatives all kind of squished in, and so I've been trying to kind of look after them and do various other things. But it's all good. We will now concentrate on this. Oh, Winchester. Hello, Lara. Have you been to our Winchester Circle? If not, you should. Yes, nod. Good. It's one of our new ones. Hello, Nishin. Nice to see you. Nishin became a pilot as part of her midlife pivot, and has written a lovely piece for us about it, which is on Noon. So we love Nishin. Hello, Antonella. Nice to see you. And Joe and Debs. Hello, everybody. So what we're going to do. Oh, Nishin's in sunny London. I know it's been really hot today. So I'm going to so while Moon Riding Rising, I really loved this book. I thought it was a really a kind of wonderful read, and also such a brilliant exemplar of what we talk about at Noon about not being done yet, about the kind of best being yet to come. And lots of our ladies also talk about how their 60s they think are their best decade. So it definitely talks to that. Hi Leah, hello Fiona. And I really like the kind of optimism of it. I like the friendship between the younger woman and the older woman. And I really love the kind of metaphor of kind of gardening and tending the garden kind of becoming a metaphor for kind of tending to herself. I really liked it. And it's also, we should say, it's part of I don't know how she pronounced it, Arcan Books.
Oh, I can't.
Arcan Books, which is a new imprint um, done by my friend June Sarpong, who some of you will have met because we did a big thing at her exhibition at the Saatchi Gallery, and we did a noon trip down there. We took lots of people down, which was really fun. And Jenny is I think you're her first publication, aren't you? After the Calling Una Martin, which
There
was
was, yeah, there's Calling Una Marson, and then Charlotte Paradise's Overspill, which came out in April,
yes, I haven't read that one.
which is the much younger, a kind of 20 something. And yeah, then me.
Yeah, so you're only the third book from the new imprint. So it's a new imprint from HarperCollins, which is dedicated to voices that don't always get heard. So Jenny is a prize-winning writer of short stories, fiction, and memoir. And is a contributor to Kit Dewar's celebrated collection Common People, an anthology of working class writers. So read your bio. And Jenny, you taught creative writing in prisons, worked with storytellers and actors for the UN and comic relief in Somalia and Kenya, chaired and spoken on panels, held workshops about writing, rejection, and resilience. Has a degree in English literature and drama, studied creative writing at UEA, which is incredibly prestigious. And then it says you've also worked on farms, in pubs, factories, as a roadie, a short-term temp in the 80s music industry in London, and renovated a former pigsty. So I think we can have quite a varied conversation today. One of the things that we've been talking about this week is how you sing the song of yourself in midlife, how you kind of boil down all those things that you've done and to kind of create a kind of coherent narrative about who you are. And I can see that that might be a tricky one for you. Well, not now because you're a published author. So welcome, Jenny. Welcome to Neen. It's really lovely to have you here.
It's
So,
really lovely to be here. Thank you.
so do you want to? We usually kick off with a little kind of reading from the book. Do you want to kick us off with
Yeah,
that?
so I'll do a little reading and I'm going to start with the prologue. I'm not going to read the whole prologue because that'll take a good few minutes, but to set it into context, the character Claire is driving out into the countryside into to go and see a cottage that she's rented that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So her marriage has ended, the family home has been sold, the kids are kind of are leaving. One has already gone, the other one's going. So yeah, she's an artist. So she's driving and it's a hot day and she's looking at the fields around her and the artist in her stirred the same way a child raises a drowsy head to ask, "Are we there yet?" The last time she lived in Suffolk, she was 18, more than old enough now to be that girl's mother, share little but a flash of familial resemblance. Still, at least it made sense of that shock in town, about to apologise to the older woman glaring at her as they narrowly avoided collision. The jolt of pure horror in understanding she was about to sorry a mirror. But whatever, here she was, there yet. More trees than she remembered. Some sort of hedge attempting to salvage the field behind it. A lot of what? She didn't do gardens. Plant stuff, then. Shrubby stuff, fieldy stuff, garlands of those sticky green balls that draped like cobwebs everywhere, and which she remembered picking endlessly off her white ankle socks as a child. And so quiet. She stood, eyes closed, listening to the gentle shush of summer-tired leaves. A rich scent drifted past, unmistakably a rose, and she opened her eyes again, scanning the few leggy blooms. A cabbage of deep red-black, sensual as velvet, caught her eye, and she dodged a thistle her own height to stick her face into it, only to find what her grandmother would have called all mouth and no trousers. There was another as she straightened, taller, smattered with white pink petals so thin she thought of the diaphanous dresses of Golden Age film stars, smiled at herself for that. She and her easel, as dusted shut as that gate, had spent too long out of one another's company. What, she wondered, with another of those strange, shivering thrills, would come out of her in all this silence, this space, after all these years? A little disappointing to find most of the rows spindly and peppered to the core with beetles, the whole thing clinging to a tree in such a way that if it too were a film star, this one would be wrinkle-sagged and trying to stop mascara clumping in the crinkles of its eyes. She had a vision of a potential future her, tanned, smiling, head-scarved, brown curls made blonde by sun, clothes paint-splattered by daring creations, perhaps a plaster on a finger even, where she'd smacked it with a hammer, putting up her new prize-winning canvases.
Mm.
Lighting candles by the juiced apples and homegrown veg, picking, preserving, pickling even, as she baked, sugared, and harvested her way through the autumn she'd see in her year here, contented, fulfilled, alone, at last, at peace. Her phone pinged. Her younger son. "My scabies is back. Can you get more cream, please?" Her estate agent. A polite reminder to send measurements of bedroom slope heights for buyer as requested. And finally, Ben. "Thought we agreed you to sort twat estate agent." The moon was already rising in the open blue as she walked back to her car. Faint as a faded photograph, but there nonetheless. She was curious to see how it would look out here. Night would start to come so much sooner now. Days start that little bit sharper. But best not think about winter here now in this last shout of summer. She just hoped that when she did finally sleep under tonight's fated moon, she'd be spared the weird dreams of late, particularly the sex ones. She didn't know any of the tall spikes of yellow or ground level blue stars as she walked back towards the house, but she did recognize Buddleia, both Rasputin and Rabbit of the plant world as she thought of it, breeding as it would in the soot of a train station wall in spite of the lack of light. She'd always admired it for that alone, actually. The last thing she did before she opened the gate was reach out and touch one heavy bloom. bend to see if its delicate buddleier smell, a little like opening a jar of raw honey, might still be in there. And it was, for all its cones of pink and purple were as summer spent now as the dying end of a bonfire night sparkler.
Lovely, thank you. I think that gives us a really good sense of that kind of that sense of coming home, but also moving into a kind of strange new chapter.
She's very much doing that, and I think it's very much a part of midlife, to be honest with you. I think that when I first, it's interesting, when I first wrote the book, and it went through various iterations, but my title for it before it went to a publisher was 400 Full Moons.
Mm,
I wanted
I
to
love
call
that.
it that because if you take when you averagely start your period at some point in your early teens and when you stop them at some point in your early 50s, you will have seen 400 full moons.
Wow.
And it felt very much to me like a kind of a complete sort of circle almost, because there's so much about that part of midlife that is about coming home to yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's so much about the part of you that's reconciling, almost like you change very much when you start that journey. And I wanted to explore the journey of maiden motherhood. I'm not going to say crone because we don't like that word. I'm going to say wise woman because we do like that word. um so yeah, it felt very much like I wanted her to go home, kind of metaphorically, but also, literally. Because I
Mm.
think you are drawn in the second half of your life. You're quite often drawn. I've noticed that with various friends of mine. They tend to go back to where they came from.
Have you done that?
Yeah, to a point I have. Yeah, it's interesting. And so have so many of the people. And we couldn't wait to get out of the middle of nowhere, when we were growing up. And yet that's what we've all come back to in one way or another. And certainly my female friends have expressed, certainly in their 50s and 60s, have expressed much more interest. If they can't metaphorically go home, then a lot of that interest in gardening, I think, is that need to earth, to kind of come.
Mm. No, I think that's really true. Nishan's just put in the chat that crone comes from crown. So actually, in a way, it's kind of linked to wise women, isn't it? And it's also linked to our what we talk about here at Noon as queenagers, which I like in terms of kind of coming into our power at this point. Crone ages, says
Prone
Jen.
ages, I like that more. I think it's creating the connotations that go with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like you said,
Yeah.
I researched that word the same, and I realized it came from crown. And certainly it used to be a good thing back in the days when we were still kind of, into the whole matriarchal society, and it wasn't a negative thing. But now, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to write this was pure rage, really, in one way,
Mm,
at how dismissed you get to kind of 50. And at the time I started writing it, there were women being laid off left, right, and centre. That there were women disappearing from the public eye
yeah.
simply because they looked older.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that, my sort of sheer sense of rage. I mean, a percentage of, I think it's something like 84% of roles in Hollywood still go to men over 50. 84%. And you're like, well, where are we? Come on, we're over half the world's population. And certainly when it comes to book buying, we're the biggest buyers of books, women of this age. And where are we, and why are our stories not represented? So
Oh,
it,
I know you're preaching to the converted here. We're not only the biggest buyers of books, we're the biggest buyers of everything. We're behind 75% of all discretionary spending, and also women over 50 make up a quarter of the population, and yet we're not kind of we don't appear. I mean, it's something that I've been particularly interested in as a journalist and also as the chair of women in journalism for a long time, because I was interested in the kind of the male lens, which stops seeing us
Hmm.
and therefore doesn't want us there. I written about that a lot in my book about what it was like actually being inside the Sunday Times and going up to the editor with this picture of, no, there aren't too many of us on school, so I can be honest about it. This picture of Charlotte Rampling, who I'd had shot in Paris in black and white. And I remember taking the cover up to the editor and saying, "Here we are, we've got Charlotte Rampling for the weekend." He was like, oh no, I don't want to see her looking like that. I want to see her looking like hot, like she was in the night porter when I had her on my wall when I was like 21 or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but Martin, the whole point is that she's 70. We can't put a picture of her from like, 50 years ago on the cover of the magazine. Everyone's going to be like, what on earth are we doing? The whole point is that we've had her shot and it's iconic seeing her now. And I had such a huge fight with them about it. I just about won, but I I kind of always remembered that, and just this always this sense in newspapers that women were there to, as my old picture editor used to put it, brighten up the page. Go, oh,
Oh
brighten up
God.
the page,
Yeah.
darling. That meant putting a picture of a pretty girl.
And it's the
So,
same, I think, even now. If you say to people, oh, you don't see older women, they go, you do. You see Judi Dench, you see Helen Mirren. You're like, name me one more.
yeah, yeah, exactly. There's about three. All
Yeah,
and the other ones that you see are oh, and Miriam Margolyes, she's allowed
yeah,
because she's funny and rude.
yeah, yeah.
And then everyone else who you're allowed to see is kind of 50 or 60 but looks 25. It's the kind of Carol Vorderman. Yeah, Jo Brand's another one, but she's funny, so she kind of gets away with it.
Yeah, you're allowed to be funny. That's acceptable because you make people laugh. So you
Yeah,
tell
or you can be Sandy Toksvig, but otherwise you've got to be kind of Claudia Winkleman or or kind of Fern Breton or all those women who are might be the same age as us, but certainly don't look it.
absolutely. And that was another thing. That's another thing. It's a point I make in the book. I hate that toxic narrative of, I mean, I've been that age. I don't need to particularly be that age again. And I certainly don't want to feel some pressure to look it. Why would I do that? What is so wrong? And I think it's kind of summed up with if a man writes a book about, and Jeff Dyer very famously did this, he wrote a book about a midlife crisis effectively, and which he kind of goes off the rails. And that's great. That's a work of literary fiction. But if a woman in her 50s writes a book about a midlife crisis, it's domestic. So it's
Yeah.
this whole kind of narrative of how you've got to be, you've got to be up there competing with a 30. I don't want to bloody compete with a 30-year-old. I've got experience, I've got value. That's one of the things that, and in fact, the thing that actually really started me off with this, I can remember watching Fleabag. I loved Fleabag,
Yeah.
absolutely adored it. I thought it was fantastic. But when Kristen Scott Thomas came on Fleabag and did her speech, involuntarily, I saw my arm doing this head punch, and I was like, yes, because that speech, I felt seen.
Yeah, for the first
Felt
time, exactly.
yeah. And when I kind of looked at that, I was like, why am I not? I'm hearing all these different women telling me these things. I'm watching them change their lives. I'm watching them, discover parts of themselves and rediscover new chapters of life. And I'm not seeing it represented. I've just seen one tiny. I Googled that speech. It is the most Googled speech of anything on Fleabag.
Yeah,
And it's this
sure.
much of two series.
Yeah,
And that made me go, right, there's a market. There's a market because I'm not the only one looking this up.
yeah,
I'm the only one feeling this need to, and something in me just, like I say, partly rage and partly the need to go, can you just shut up with this bollocks of
yeah,
I need to not be able to move my forehead. I need to be, working. I don't want to try and look like I did 20 years ago. It's a different part of my life.
yeah. And I think, but
Very bad.
that's the problem, is that it's the kind of lack of value which is put on us. Well, I mean, I write about it a lot because I think it's the male lens, isn't it? It's kind of patriarchy values women for being kind of young and fanciful and kind of
Mm,
second, and when we're not, then they're not interested in us at all. And so for me, it's the kind of clearest exemplar that we're still, living in that paradigm. I wrote in my newsletter last week, I went to the House of Commons last week for a big new thing which has been launched by Lynn Franks called What Women Want. And the really depressing thing, one of their co-sponsors is Good Housekeeping, and they'd done a thing of all their all their readers, or they said they'd done this huge survey, and they came back saying, yeah, that the thing that all women really want, according to their survey, wasn't world peace or the end of violence against women. It was to be half a stone lighter.
yeah.
And I stood up in the comments and I said, this is like, A, I don't believe it's true. And B, I think it's like massively depressing that women are still valuing themselves through that paradigm. I mean, that's the kind of internalized misogyny that we got from having been fed all that crap for kind of for
Yeah.
so long.
Yeah. It
So I
makes
think
me
it's
wonder.
really,
Sorry, I just had to jump in there, Els, because you and I have talked about this. It makes me wonder if that was a multiple choice question, because
yes,
for so
I
many
don't
people,
know. I don't know if it was. I mean, I also think it was a It was a question asked by a glossy magazine, and glossy magazines are basically there to sell women expensive kind of makeup and perfume that they don't need. It's that kind of old thing about, why do women need makeup and perfume? Because they're ugly and they smell. That's the and it's also because it's the products with the highest margins of any other, anything within the whole kind of retail sector. So I think it's really important to remember that there's a kind of military industrial complex arms race involved in women feeling bad about themselves and buying very overpriced products.
I
So
also think it's the same thing. I think you're kind of, as women, we're kind of damned when we're fertile, because you're judged like hell for being a young woman, on how attractive you are, on how you view sex, on the way you use your sexuality, all of that. We're damned as hell for being fertile, and then we're damned all over again when we're not fertile, because we're not, considered beautiful enough or young enough or whatever enough, or that.
valuable enough within that lens, which only
Yeah.
values you for the things that men value. So I think that that's the important thing, that that's only one way of valuing women. And a lot of what we're trying to do at Noon is to try and change that inside ourselves as well, because I think that that's we've been told that so often, that that's the matrix through which we should value and see ourselves, that it's quite hard to kind of unpick it. I mean, I had such a front row seat in journalism for so long, I could kind of see that matrix being created all around me, the bingo wings, the cankles, all that crap. And and how women were kind of taught to see those things in themselves and criticize them in others, because that was kind of what was helpful to society. And I only think that we change things when we begin to point that
Mm.
out. And one of the things I think is interesting about what we're doing here is how much younger women respond to the idea that actually being in your 50s, 60s, and 70s is quite good fun. It's when it kind of gets interesting. You've got quite a lot of power, you have more confidence, you kind of can step into your kind of prime, into your power. And that's not something that's talked about in the culture really at all. So I think it's another reason why books like yours are so important. So will you tell us a bit about the kind of how you came to write this, and about Claire, your heroine, and how you got the idea?
Wow, yeah. I mean, like I say, there was a massive spark with the Kristen Scott Thomas thing, and I can remember watching Fleabag and thinking, this is really interesting, and it's fascinating, because you should not like that character, really. She's flawed, she's done terrible things, and of course we loved her and we rooted for her. But I couldn't stop thinking, like, where will she be in 10 or 20 years' time? Because that was the point in my life I was at, and I was starting to listen. So much of what I write is sparked by conversations and what's going on around me. And I was listening to all of these stories, living my own story. And it was more and more and more, I was thinking, why am I not seeing this? Why are the people that I'm seeing at this age, why are they the Olive Kitteridges? They're difficult, or they're killing their husbands, or they're not just like normal women just living their lives, going, which we all were doing, going, okay, well, I've played all these roles for all these years. I've kind of done motherhood. I've done this. I've been a wife. I've done, and where am I? Who am I? What do I actually want? Yeah, okay, it'd be great to lose half a stone, but actually that's not going to make my life complete. And what I want
No,
is
I mean, it's not going to change anything. I mean, it's so pathetic in the kind
my
of great
clothes will fit
discourse.
more nicely or something, maybe my bum will look smaller. But actually, where does that leave me at 4 in the morning when I'm lying in bed going, how do I want the rest of my life to look? What shape do I want my life to be?
Yeah,
I've got
what's my purpose in being here? Yeah,
Yeah, who am I? What am I now? I've been
yes,
these things, I've been those things, but now I'm not that. And when you've hit menopause, I think one of the biggest things about it, and I think there's such a lot written about perimenopause, and rightly so, but there's a huge change when actually all of that stops and you have no hormones governing you anymore.
yeah.
You can completely trust your own brain for the first time, probably in, I don't know, 40, 50 years. You are
I
not.
love that idea. Yes.
No, you're not governed by cyclical, and that was part of the demise of my marriage. Was when I realized, when it all finally stopped, I thought, oh, it's not just me. I'm not the only person who makes these rows happen or upsets people in the house. Actually, they are responsible for this as well, because I'm completely on a level and it's still happening. So it can't just be my cycle, my moods, so
Mm,
you learn to trust yourself in a very different way, and there's a different space in your life and a certain element of liberation. For the
yeah.
first time in many, many, many years, you can ask yourself the question of, what do I want? What do I want? Not what do these people want? How do I fit around these requirements and this care of giving? And you may only get a window of space in between elderly parents or the needs of kids or whatever. But suddenly you're in a place where you're not having to think about other people's lives here. You can actually just think about your own. And I really, really wanted to explore how that is.
No, I think that that's so important, Jenny, isn't it? And I think that also for so many of us, we haven't really been encouraged to ask ourselves what we want. Um, it was one of the things that really struck me when I got tipped out of the Sunday Times and kind of started on a new path, that when I really began to ask myself that question, it was like my brain tried to shut it down so damn quick. It's like, well, don't be ridiculous. Of course, you can't ask yourself what you want. Who cares what you want? There are all these things that you've got to do for everybody else. And so it almost feels like a kind of question which is like verboten, kind of like what kind of, don't be ridiculous. Of course, you can't ask yourself what you want. And I do think that that's a kind of radical act for women. And there's a really interesting a question on the chat from Corenza about whether we think that there are, she says, a question for Jen and Eleanor, do you think we go through different ages of wisdom?
Mm.
And I think that that's kind of related, because I think that the end of the hormone fog kind of clears a bit, and we're suddenly like, hang on a sec, when's it my turn? And we see that in the research that we did with Noon, that's the question that people are beginning to ask themselves. It's like, hang on, when do I get to go, and when does it finally become about me and what I want? And actually that it's not selfish to do that. See, Katrina's put on this, and the freedom. And I think that there is a freedom in finally being able to say, well, actually, what would I like to do? But I think it's also quite can be quite disorientating, because we haven't. Yeah, exactly, Jacqueline. She said, embrace the fact that you can say what you think, feel. It's only taken most of us nearly half a century to say our piece authentically. I
Oh,
think that's true, because I think that women are so often squished into the shapes. That's how I talk about it in my book, that suit other people, and we fit ourselves into those shapes because it gets us affection or belonging or connection or all the things that we've been told that we're supposed to want, like, and so I think it takes a long time to slough that off and finally ask yourself, or dare to ask yourself, the question, what do I want, what could I be? And I think the difference for us as a generation is that we can finally ask that, and we've got a bit of time. We've got the kind of the longevity dividend of thinking, actually at 50 we might only be halfway through. An actuary in the Noon Circle in London last month said, actually sat there and said, she said, if you're a 63-year-old woman, you're pretty likely to live till you're 97. That's the chart thing they have on their charts. So if that's the case, this act of asking oneself at 50 or at 60, what do I want? What could I be? It's actually a real question, because you've got some time to become that. And that's what I really loved about your books. I think it's a great book about becoming
Mm.
at 50. So tell us a bit about kind of Claire and her artistic ambitions, and to what extent does that mirror maybe your own experience or those of other women that you know?
yeah, I wanted her to be an artist because I think, and I think this ties in as well to gardening, famously, and it's happened with so many women I know. I mean, I got into gardening younger, but so many women I know who hated gardening got into gardening in midlife, and I think there's something to be said for this need to creatively express. I mean, you're in what you were just saying just now. I mean, I think we also carry an enormous amount of emotional baggage, women, because we take the emotional burden for a family. So we learn very much to kind of pick our battles, and it's hard bloody work, all of that emotional stuff, quite honestly. And I think when you get to this point and you need something, I think, to nurture, which I don't mean you need to care for people, because my God, we've done enough of that. But I think what happens is that with something like gardening or art and creativity, you are giving something out, putting something out, and it's giving something back. And
Yeah.
those things in life are quite rare. I mean, you go to work, you get paid, you do that for money. And one of the things with Claire, and that mirrors my own life, is for years and years and years and years, I did writing work. I did for money. I still do. I do editorial work and copywriting. I don't particularly love, but I need the money that it brings. My
Mm.
creative stuff is the stuff that brings me joy. And when I think about the conversations I had, more than they want to lose half a stone, what most midlife women seem to want, as far as I can make out, is peace and joy.
Yeah,
A sense of joy and a sense of peace and a sense of wholeness, of being able to be authentically, completely, wholly who we are,
yeah,
without kind of all these caveats and everything. So I wanted Claire to express herself artistically and to have sat on something that she almost didn't dare to do, couldn't financially afford to do. And I think, again, it's that thing, isn't it? There are so many more years behind you, even
yeah.
if we've still got a good few years ahead of us. That sense of time, and we don't know if those years are going to be healthy, good years.
No, exactly. But
That's
there's definitely a drumbeat of if not now, when.
very much so. And the older you get, the more that happens around you and the more it happens to you and to people that you love. And so there becomes this pressing sense of if not now, when?
Mm,
I need to find that this is for me and I want to do. And quite often we go back to something that we loved doing at 18.
yeah, or
Yeah,
eight.
oh, yeah. Yeah. I've heard people go, I haven't played the piano since I was a teenager and I've taken it up again, or I haven't, or becoming a pilot, fulfilling these dreams, making that change, marking that. I wanted to explore that with Claire. I wanted it, and I wanted it to be art, I think, because I certainly didn't want it to be anything to do with words, and I didn't want it to be something huge and dramatic. I wanted it to be something accessible,
Mm,
because the other thing in midlife, I mean, my marriage ended like Claire's. My marriage ended, and so suddenly you're going, right. Well, I have to think about money. I have to think about money. I'm not, and I don't know whether my parents are going to need care for years. So I don't, all of these things come into it, and so I wanted it to be something that you could affordably do.
yes.
You know what I mean? Sort of accessible to anybody. It could have been, playing an instrument. It could have been challenging yourself to go and do a walk around the Lake District, whatever. I've got a friend who goes off now and does Tough Mudders
Yeah.
and this sort of stuff. So
I've
I
got
think
several friends who are kind of walking the coast path, not just because of the
absolutely.
salt path, or kind of have
Yeah.
started doing kind of pilgrimage walks, or it's a kind of I think it's some kind of sense of a personal quest, isn't it?
Would be
I
the
do
same.
silent retreats. I mean, whatever whatever floats your boat.
Yeah, I mean, I used to teach yoga, and it's astonishing how many people used to come to yoga because they want to try and find this new way
Yeah,
of finding this thing inside. It becomes about the inside. I think for half your life, certainly as women in careers and families and whatever, it's about the externals. It's about what's around you and who's around you. And at this point, it becomes very much more an inward thing, and how you find something. I'm reading a book at the moment about a woman who dealt with grief and all the stuff that went on for her midlife by sea swimming, cold water, deep water sea swimming. Again,
yeah.
that's not something that you can afford to do if you live near the coast. But yeah, I
And
certainly
I think what's interesting, what we see though, is that kind of wherever you are and whatever you have been doing, and it's not just kind of rich middle class ones, which are certainly where you have a few more choices. But I was really struck when I was in Devon. I was talking to a lady who was actually she'd come to do some cleaning with the Airbnb we were at, and she was talking about how she'd left her job at the council. She'd absolutely had enough of it, and she'd taken up crocheting, which she loved, and she did a bit of cleaning of some Airbnbs to make a bit more cash, and she spent more time with her grandchildren. And she was saying, I don't have as much money as I did, but I just got to a point where I had to do what I wanted to do, and I was sick of not doing that. And that was really interesting to me, that it wasn't just because I thought, oh gosh, is this like a kind of posh women's prerogative? And she was saying no, or that all her friends had pivoted so that they could spend more of their time doing what it was that they loved in whatever small way, whether that was spending more time with their dogs and kind of walking on the beach because we were near the beach, or whatever it was a really definite shift of, no, hang on, I want to do something for me. And we really see that so clearly in the Noon research, that after their health and having enough money to live, the most important thing to women at this point was having time for myself and my own interests.
Yeah,
It's really interesting. I mean, and that is a switch. I don't think you get that.
I
Or
think
maybe, I mean, to go back to Corinda's question about the kind of ages of wisdom, what
Mm.
I see in the different generations. So I've got a daughter who's 23 who's just spent the last year in Paris, and she has spent the entire year going to different galleries and incredibly like go way over my head kind of art movies and kind of hanging out in like extremely trendy bookshops, and she's basically been completely honing her kind of critical faculties, her kind of sense of who she is and what she likes, and I love that because I don't think when I was her age I had that, I was quite confident, but I didn't have that confidence. I didn't have that sense that I had the right to really kind of go off and finally hone who I was, my artistic judgment. Yeah, I've always been a writer, but I didn't feel that I could go and spend that time doing that. I was much too busy thinking, oh, I need to get a flat, I need to get a job, I need to maybe because we came out into the recession of the kind of early 90s. But it was just a different sense of what we were kind of entitled to take for ourselves.
oh
So,
God.
Corenza, to your thing about ages of wisdom, I mean, I hope that that's changing with younger women, that they do feel more entitled to that kind of sense of self-expression when they're younger.
I think they do, and I think it's very. Although sometimes I actually think it's worse for them in some ways than it was. I mean, it's a
Mm.
difficult juggling act because, on the one hand, I can remember my sixth form tutor telling me not to bother applying to university because I was.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it was. I'm in this working class kid, and he was like, "Don't kid yourself about who you can be." And
Wow.
yeah, yeah, you're good at. I mean, this is 1986.
Yeah, so it's not
Like,
1950. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're good at writing. I mean, what you're going to do with that? Journalism, secretary until you have a baby. That was the kind of aspiration was not encouraged. And one of the reasons I wanted to get out so desperately, and the same with Claire, is because I wanted to. I mean, we were the girls of Thatcher. We were like, we can be anything we want to be. We can be that VW advert woman chucking off her
Yes.
purse and her diamond ring. And then in the 90s, we were sold the lie that we could have kids and we could still have a career and we could still, and it was all bollocks, really, wasn't it? I mean, all it meant was we didn't have it all. We just did it all. That's what it meant. And then, there was a backlash to that. So I look at women now and I look at them not dating, not taking on boyfriends, not putting up with men's crap. I mean, they phone up work now and go, I'm not coming in, I've got a bad period. And that's acceptable.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, it was just like
Oh,
you couldn't even have said it. Even if it was the reason why you were coming in, you had to say that you had flu or food poisoning. I mean,
yeah.
the only time I ever mentioned kind of women's problems to any of my editors, they would just be like so horrified. They'd just be like, "So you only did it if you really had to kind of, you really
Your
needed to
basic card
escape
that
or
you
you wanted a
play to
day
get them
away."
off your back, really. Yeah. But so I do
And
think,
I remember a very senior woman. I remember saying to a very senior boss of mine, "Oh, congratulations on appointing a female CEO." And later on, the woman turning around to me and saying, "Never remind the boss that I am a woman." So
wow.
yeah, so it wasn't just like you didn't mention your kind of period problems. It was like you would get on much better if you pretended to be a bloke. I mean, and that used to be said to you, said kind of quite openly. The more you could behave like a man in that situation, the more likely you were to be promoted, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember a neighbor of mine who was editor for a while of Mother and Baby magazine who cut her hair short so she'd be more androgynous. And that was for Mother and
Mother and
Baby
Baby
magazine.
magazine. Yeah, exactly.
Phenomenal. But wisdom, yes, I think young women do have a certain level of more wisdom. And I think in some ways they have us to learn from. We had no roadmap.
Yeah.
Our mothers, I can remember my mum when she had a hysterectomy, and this would have been the early 80s. She still had to have my dad sign the form.
Wow.
I mean, it's not that long ago that women still they couldn't get a mortgage on their own. They
Yeah,
couldn't,
my mum, my parents split up in the mid 70s. My mum was a university lecturer at the time, and she couldn't get a mortgage on her own. She had to get her dad to guarantee the mortgage because she was a woman on her own and with three small children, and she wasn't allowed a mortgage in her own name.
Yeah. So I think they in some ways they have us, and we were the generation that didn't have a voice. Very, I mean, that's again touched on in the book. You didn't have a voice. You were not encouraged to have a voice. Women were certainly in the 70s and 80s meant to be a certain way,
Yeah.
and men had every right to do whatever. They wanted to grope you on a tube, they groped you on. I mean, we wore tube shoes in the 80s to step back onto their feet when they stuck their dick into your back, so that
And it was so
you actually designed certain things. And we were, someone flashed at you, laugh it off, be flattered by it. This is the kind of stuff that we would.
I remember being flashed at in outside my flat in Covent Garden when I was about 23, and the very kind of smart a chap in a kind of smart overcoat kind of coming up to me. I thought he was going to ask me the way, and him kind of exposing himself. And I was really scared because I was on my own. I remember running back to my flat and ringing the police because I thought, and actually there's loads of research now that shows that people who flash go on to be rapists. I mean, it's like a real like a continuum. And I remember ringing the police and them saying to me, oh, it's nothing, don't, not even bothering to kind of report. And I insisted, and they came round to my flat and they sent two men. And I
Yeah.
felt really kind of like, that didn't feel good. That didn't feel
Yeah,
good to
you
me
feel
or
like the one who's done
comforting.
something wrong. You feel like in some way you've been, kind of flimsy or something because
Yeah.
it's upset you.
Yeah, it was like, oh, don't be so pathetic. Why are you making such a
Yeah.
fuss?
But I think they are the girls now. I mean, I've got two sons and I see the impact on them.
Yeah, Katrina's saying the girls today get big dick
Oh
pics.
God, yeah. Yeah, they do. I mean, they do.
And not just the girls, the queenagers too. We've heard quite a lot of stories in some of our circles of what some of the women get sent. I mean, yeah, that's like a whole new.
Terrifying.
These things kind of mutate, don't they? They don't go away.
Yeah, so I think our
Katrina
daughters.
says it's horrific.
It is horrific. And I think our daughters are lucky they have us. We are giving them more of a roadmap than our mothers could give us, and their
Yes.
mothers could give their all. So I think it kind of goes on through the generations. And I think that's one thing I also wanted to explore in the
Mm.
book. And that's again, going back to the thing with, as I was saying to Jennifer before, that
Antonella says she'd rather have a picture of a garden than a dick
we'd
pic.
all rather
I'm
have a picture.
totally with you, Antonella.
The
Give
thing
me
I
a
don't
rose or a foxglove any day.
I mean, the thing I never understand about men, I will never, 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 in all the years I live, get my head around why they think that part of the anatomy is attractive. It looks like a dead turkey. I've seen nicer things at Christmas lounging around in my freezer than I've ever seen on a dick pic or a nude that
I
isn't a
think it's true. I
Michelin.
think even if you quite fancy a man, and you might like him, I don't think you really want to see a picture of his
But
penis.
none of us do. We none of us do. I mean, the
I
female
can see
form, I
everyone
can see
pissing
why.
themselves on the chat. That's really funny.
I can see why the
Come on the
female
chat,
form.
anyone who's actually like really delighted to receive a dick pic, even from someone that they quite like. I just don't think it's erotic.
It's many things, and sometimes it's laugh out loud, but it is absolutely not erotic in any. I mean, a forearm, lovely,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
can
Bit
yeah,
of
get
neck.
that. Something like shoulders, but
That's really funny.
no.
I've got to say, I went to interview Joe Wood yesterday, who's just written a book, which is a bit of a kind of Queen Age of fairy tale about leaving her marriage. Funnily enough, it's about a 52-year-old whose husband runs off with a 19-year-old.
Oh
Sounds a bit
God.
like Ronnie Wood. So it's real, like thinly described autobiography, but it does have some hilarious anecdotes about dating in your kind of 50s and 60s. She has one boyfriend who's got a prosthetic leg who takes it off and crawls to the sea, and then she's really funny about how she doesn't fancy him anymore. And another one who's a kind of porn star and has a kind of permanent erection, which she can't get her head around. She was very honest about it when I talked to her. She was like, yeah, they're all kind of real stories, either from her life or her friends who that she's kind of that
I mean,
she
that
was.
one.
I thought it was quite funny that at least this is beginning to be talked about. There's another book coming out this week too, Fiona Lambert, who's another one of our queenagers. She's a mate, and she's got a big book out coming out about dating in your kind of 60s. So I really like the fact that this is beginning to be talked about, because I think even when I set up Noon like 4 years ago, people wouldn't, it was there weren't books around about women shagging in their 60s. I mean, they just weren't. I don't think Joe Wood's book is a brilliant book. I mean, your book's beautifully written, which is like a puts it in a whole different zone. But I do think it's interesting that we're beginning to get more stories about this, more stuff on the TV. I mean, okay, it's mostly Nicole Kidman who definitely falls into one of the categories we were talking about earlier, but I do think that there's a sense that women, the kind of interior lives of women at this point and their sex lives, and that just a focus on their lives is beginning to come back. And I hope that's because, I hope that's partly because of some of the things that we've been doing, and also because we're such a huge financially lucrative demographic. I mean, that's what seems really crazy that they won't do. Katrina, the book is called The Resurrection of Flow, and it's all about a woman who gets divorced in her 50s, and then kind of is who's an actress who kind of then goes around shagging lots of younger men and taking coke and running to go to Ibiza and taking ketamine and stuff. It's quite racy.
You
But
know, though, I
again,
read.
it's an interesting, it's just an interesting perspective. She's 70 now as well, so she's a bit older than us.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Jennifer before the thing started, saying that in some ways my book's been quite Marmite, and a couple of my
Has
friends,
it?
well, certainly in terms of the sex thing. I mean, some people
Okay.
don't like the structure, they don't like the way, but the sex thing, and I've noticed this. I went to Women's Prize Live a couple of weeks ago, and the conversations, I've never had so many conversations about a book as divisive as All Fours by Miranda July.
Yes, I have read. Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah, which very famously, when it came out, Christmas time, lots of women went running off and tried to shag younger men. And we now know that there's an enormous market in kind of, midlife women's sex toys, lubes. These are all things that are starting to become much, much, much more mainstream.
Yeah.
None of this was happening when I was writing this book, 3 years
No,
ago.
I agree. It's really new. When we first set up New,
Yeah.
we had a session where we had some Italian sex therapists come and talk to us who were creating a vibrator for kind of older women. And we had a very quite extraordinary evening where certainly, I mean, I'm a journalist. I've heard a lot. There was a lot of things that were definitely new to me on that. But I do think that there's been a shift even in the last kind of couple of years on, on this. And it's interesting that you say that since you wrote the book. So what kind of reactions have you had from it?
Oh, I was saying to Jennifer and to Women's Prize, which kind of made people laugh. But I gave an early copy to two really good friends of mine who'd read. I wrote a memoir some years ago that should have been published but wasn't.
Mm. Well,
And
maybe it'll get published now.
yeah, they loved it. They loved that. They loved
Yeah.
it. Very, very, very different to this. And I love them dearly. And they were very honest, but I was kind of like, gave them a proof copy. And when I went to see them, there was just silence. And like,
What
oh,
horrified silence.
yeah, this doesn't bode well. And I was kind of like, how did you get on with it? And one looked at the other one and she went, oh, there's a lot of sex in it, Jenny. There's a lot of sex in it, isn't there? And we don't really do that, do we? We just want a nice cup of tea and the dog. That's
I
what
just
we
don't think that's true.
we don't want all this sex. We don't. Who are these women who would? And I was like, oh God,
Me?
maybe I've written something and there are going to be all these women out there going, well, I don't, honestly to God, I don't know, and I have found that there are, and it's surprising, some people that I've thought will love it haven't. And some people have been like, I love that. And I love the way you talk about desire. And I
Yeah.
love the way that because we're not dead yet.
No,
You know,
very far from it.
changes, but it also changes for men. I mean, there's that famous quote, is it Bette Midler, who's like, if I've got a problem, all the rest of it, then what are you with your limp dick and your Viagra? Like, how dare you judge me when, you get a
Well, it's
problem.
also great for you either. But I also think that does. I think that also does us a disservice. I was having a conversation with some really good friends the other day, and we were all saying that we thought that we were having much better sex in our 50s, in our mid 50s than we have done before. And it was kind of we know each other quite well, so it's kind of really quite an honest conversation. And I think that that's really true. I think there's a sense of knowing yourself better, knowing what you want better, being less self-conscious. If you've been with your partner for a long time, you kind of really know what's going on, and there's a different kind of level of trust. And I think it does a disservice to all women to imply that you have to kind of look like a porn star to be enjoying sex. I actually almost think it's the opposite, that the more you're seeing yourself through a kind of a lens from the outside of what's this supposed to look like, what am I supposed to look like, rather than how is this supposed to feel and how does it feel kind of, for me and being in the moment. I think that those two things are really, really opposite. I wrote a lot about pornography before I set up Noon. It's one of the things I wrote about a lot as a columnist. And one of the things that I was really struck by then was younger women talking about it was all about what it looked like. I was talking to a psychologist
Mm.
down on the South Coast who talked to a lot of younger women. They were saying they'd slept with a lot of men. They had never had an orgasm because the younger women were entirely obsessed by what it was supposed to look like, how they were supposed to look like a porn star, what they were supposed to be performing in a way that I think it wasn't for us because we had no idea what it was supposed to look like. And also most men, when you were like, kind of 80, well, we got into bed with them in the 80s, we had no idea what it was supposed to look like, or if, whether it was meant to be porn or whatever. Most women were pretty happy to have a real life girl kind of in their bed. You didn't feel like you were being compared to things in the way that they do now. Whereas I think that there's now a huge, because of the kind of Instagramification and the kind of filming of things, and also because a whole generation of young men have been bred on internet porn, I think it's a very different kind of I think it's a very different kind of game. And so in some
Yeah.
ways I think we're quite lucky to be in our generation in that on
I
that front.
do. And I think we can own our sexuality in a different way. And that was something that was very, very important to me to explore because it has always fascinated me, this dichotomy between how a man can have a very strong sex urge or sleep with people and all the rest of it, and it's celebrated. It's almost a badge of honor. And yet, and it still happens now. There are still these girls now that are going, oh, am I a freak? Oh, it feels a bit slutty. Oh, I feel a bit, because you've got a healthy sex desire. I mean, we're women, we are governed by reproductive cycles. And, it's that thing of, for half your life when you're a young woman, you're governed by what your body is telling you. And I can remember being young and ovulating and literally craving, being sort of so like, oh, I need to find myself. I want to go and club one down, drag him back to my cave. If I'd been a man, to have acknowledged that would have been absolutely fine. But I can remember having boyfriends who were like, most women are kind of don't ever say that, Jenny. You're kind of like a bloke who's also like a woman, which felt like a very backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
And I would stand in bars when I worked in bars, and I could, if I had a pound for every married man who would tell me how the wife doesn't understand him and how the sex was boring because it's quite pedestrian and she's not exciting enough. And I thought, but if she is exciting, she's a slut. So
Yeah.
make your mind up. What do you? So I
Yeah,
wanted to.
that's a kind of impossible double standard. But what I thought was interesting about Joe Wood's book actually is there's a total lack of any kind of guilt or kind of any sense of that she thinks she's behaving in a kind of slutty way. She's very, and I think in your book too, it's very free. And I also think that one of the things about kind of being older is you can damn well do what the hell you like and nobody needs to know about it. And I was really lucky in my early 20s because I lived on my own in a flat in Drury Lane in Covent Garden, and nobody needed to know what I was getting up to. And I always thought, and that I felt quite free about that. It was like, that this is good. And I think that there's a sense as in midlife, if you're kind of, you come out of a relationship and you're dating again, it's like, you can do what the hell you like, and who's to judge? Who needs to know? Carol
I
Vorderman was good on this too. She was like, yeah, I have like, 4 or 5 different kind of people I'm involved with. Everyone knows what's going on, and we behave in a kind of adult way. Why not? So I think that maybe we finally get beyond that sexual kind of double standard, partly because maybe the stakes are lower because the patriarchy doesn't kind of think we're worth kind of worrying about, but we still have desires and we can do what the hell we like. And I think
absolutely.
that that's important.
And I think ownership and wanting the sweetness and the joys of life. I mean, I watched what is it, Goodbye Leo Grand or Farewell to Leo Grand, the Emma Thompson film. I watched
Yeah.
that writing this.
Yeah, somebody's mentioned that here.
Oh,
Caroline
have
said you've
they?
got Emma Thompson recommending sex workers as her friends who seem to be doing in their 60s. I was saying I don't think you necessarily need
No,
sex.
well, maybe wouldn't go that far, but I would say that you don't necessarily need a partner to have a nice time on your own. There are plenty of fun things out
For
there that
sure.
you can do, and it's another added layer and joy to life that I think is much more open now, and we can be much more liberated and own that a lot more now.
Yeah,
And
exactly, and in quite in a kind of non-shameful way. And I
yeah,
think that again that is again quite recent. I mean, I think even kind of within our noon community a few years ago when I was like, who wants to come and talk about sex and kind of vibrators for queenagers, a few people were a bit like, really? Is she really going to do that? But actually, it was a very liberating conversation. So I do think that there's a shift. And on Noon, we try and be very upfront about that. It's a great piece on the site about going to a kind of a swingers club, kind of, in your kind of 50s and 60s. And if, indeed, at one of our recent circles, there was a whole load of conversation about going on some site I'd never heard of called Field, which is literally for like just quite transactional sex.
Well,
And one of the women,
also,
yeah, go on,
yeah,
Jen.
also just we have recently updated with new reporting on um, sex toys for older women and lube. With now that lube is no longer a four-letter word, it's really exciting because I mean everybody remembers back when it used to be something that was only really talked about in the gay community.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I can remember my mum. I mean, my parents always had this amazing sex life. I mean, they really did. An absolute love story, my parents have been together 60 years.
Oh,
And she was a nurse, so she was really open about everything. But I can remember me and my sister were like, "Oh, we found this thing," and it was KY jelly, and it was this sort of very hush hush thing of, "Oh no, that's because of an infected mosquito bite or something." Like all this different stuff that even my open mother, who I mean, I went home once and said, "Mum, what does wanker mean?" Because someone had written it on the bus, and 2.5 hours later, I emerged with pages of drawings, and
that
was
must have,
very determined to be
he
this
sounds great.
nurse. So I think, and it's one of the things that Tansy, the older character, says in the book is make no mistake, we can quite often be harbingers of doom. And that's one thing that I think our generation don't want younger women to feel. We look at them, we see how hard it is for them. And
Mm,
so look, there are these things that will come to you. It's not just that you're gonna get a bit craggy and saggy. Yeah, that's gonna happen. And maybe you're gonna try and fight that. That's your decision. But at the end of the day, it's not going to make you happy. What's going to make you happy is how you find your joy, your
yeah,
sense of purpose, your meaning, and the layers that go on top of that. And fuck yeah, have some fun, have some nice orgasms, have some, you're not dead.
no.
You're dead for a very, very long time, but until that happens, you're not. And
Yeah,
if you
and
want
and I think there's something very powerful about kind of, being joyful inside one's sentient body while one has the chance, whatever form that, whatever form that takes. And I think that I love the return in your book to that the kind of natural world, her sense of a return to the seasons, to her the place of her roots. And I think you're right that there's a sense of kind of grounding all those kind of early homes, or really literally the earth becoming very important. There are various places that I go back to, kind of in the Cotswolds where I spent a lot of time as a child, and it literally moves me to tears walking down some of those paths or seeing some of those trees. There's just such a sense of a kind of like a visceral connection to those places, and I thought that you really got captured that beautifully in the kind of in that sense of the Suffolk landscape and that return.
I had that conversation with June, who's always been a city person and is now moving out to the countryside.
Yeah, she now lives in a commune, doesn't she, outside Oxford? She was telling me about it the other day and says
I
she's
now do
special.
this. I now go walking barefoot on the grass and I find this. And again, it's peace. It's a sense of peace, a sense of being something bigger, and a
Mm,
sense of something that gives something back to you.
yeah,
That, and I mean, for all the caring we do, for all the different roles we play, I think that although they give you various things, there is something very, very deep in Mother Earth. And I think there's a reason why it's called Mother Earth. There is something about us as we get older that connects very much in a different way to nature.
yeah, and I think that it surprises you if it. I mean, it kind of has surprised me because it wasn't something that was so important to me when I was younger, but I now feel it's it's kind of massively important. And I also think that the other piece of this, the jigsaw, which isn't talked about so much, almost more of a taboo than sex, is the kind of spiritual shift,
Mm.
and a sense of feeling kind of connected to the earth, but also connected to everything, being feeling like, one's a kind of part of a bigger kind of, web of connection of a kind of
Yes, I think
cosmos.
again it's part of that full cycle thing that I mean, we all know that women will sink periods if they're put in a space together. We also know, my ex used to work for Bounty, the people that did bounty packs when you had a baby. There are more babies born on full moons. There just are.
Mm,
No, the way that we connect to nature, the way that we connect to cycles, the way that we connect to things like full moons, I
yeah.
think becomes even more prevalent, like you say, as you get older. And I think if you're connected to nature, you are automatically connected to something bigger.
Yeah, definitely. And I found myself the last strawberry moon running around on the heath with some friends, kind of banging drums and
Oh
kind of
yeah, howling. Yeah,
howling at the moon. Exactly, which would have been an anathema to my younger self. So I think also a lot of these things that we would have kind of, gone, what? We kind of also begin to see the kind of point of as we get older. Jenny, thank you. It's been such a huge pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for your wonderful book, and for kind of being so generous in the way that you've kind of shared your kind of thoughts with so much of us. Oh yes, someone else doing qigong in the park this morning. Love a bit of qigong, bit of kind of energy chi. And no, Jenny, honestly, it's been a real delight to have you. Really, really loved your book. I think you're a beautiful writer, and I'm really
thank you.
interested to see kind of what you do next. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it again.
I'd
And
love to. I am writing a second one.
hooray!
We
About
will.
the same character.
Oh, no, 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 no. This will be completely different.
Oh, good.
Everything I write is completely different. So no, I mean, at some point I might come back to Claire, but no, this is completely different again. But obviously, women will center. But also, well, we'll yeah,
We'll come back to that. To
we'll
be
come back to
continued.
that.
I
Yeah,
love this comment from Jo. She says Tansy was almost like Claire's guardian angel. She didn't know that she needed a friend to guide her from a distance and observe her on her journey in her new life. But yeah, but I think we all do, Jo. I think you're totally right that there's a sense as that we all need somebody who goes, I see you and I can see that you can be, more than this, or I see your potential. And I think in some ways it's a bit like now, like we were when we were kind of kids or kind of teenagers, or I've said this before about when you come out of university and you're looking around going, oh crikey, what am I going to be? And there is a sense of somebody can see something in you which you don't know yourself. And I think we're kind of back there again in midlife, that there's a sense that we can all do for each other and say, I can see that you would be bloody amazing at that. And we see that in the circles, this amazing sense of kind of community and of support and of creating a kind of web, or co-creating a possibility of what this next stage might look like. And I think we're really at the early stages of that. I love your book. Mine is also kind of dealing with some of the same kind of
absolutely.
territory in a kind of non-fiction way. And we need more and more and more versions of this so that we all have a sense of the paths that we could walk.
Absolutely. I'm gonna, yeah, I just one thing I want to add is to that is orcas. Killer whales. They're now doing, aren't they, research on women saying, oh, actually, maybe we've got this wrong. Maybe there's something to be learned by what orcas do, which is the value of the grandmother in orca
Yes,
pod.
but I think that that's true to a point, but I also think it's really important to say that 30% of our Noon community are child free, and of those,
Yeah,
nearly half are intentionally child
yeah,
free. So I think that there's a kind of problem with saying, defining us as going, oh, well, because there's all this kind of, Lucy Cook, actually, who's one of the main zoologists who kind of writes about orcas, is an old friend of mine. I was with her at a festival the other day, and we were talking about this, and I was saying, yes, but that again puts women back into a kind of biologically determined box, that we're only here for kind of breeding, and that again puts us in within a kind of patriarchal framing. And
yeah.
actually, I think what's interesting, and for me, the last bit of the kind of last bastion of feminism, is women mattering, whether or not their mothers, grandmothers, whatever, of themselves, that the fact that we're here and we have something to give and some joy and some creativity to put in the world, that's enough, that we're valued for ourselves, not as kind of breeding or kind of grandparental
Oh
breeding
God, yeah, that's
kind of.
definitely what I mean more than, I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
Tansy.
no, I think it's really, exactly, and
Yeah,
I just think it's really important to say that, because I think so many women feel, who are child free, feel so unseen in that kind of perspective, and I'm so aware of how many of them of us, are in that situation within this community, that I think it's also really important have that
About the
perspective.
value we have, isn't it? It's about the wisdom we have to share and the connections we have to make, and the way, because we are connected to something bigger as we get older and we are more wise, we have that to give. We can help, and I think there
Yes,
is.
and I think we can help. We can help across the. Doesn't have to be biologically determined. I think. I think there's a huge amount of kind of mentoring and help and kind of stuff that we can put back into the world and share our wisdom. And we started off talking about wise women. I think that that's definitely it. But I just think I'm just wary always about seeing that within a kind of biological determinism.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's been
Oh
an
yeah.
absolute joy. Thank you so much. And I really hope, if anyone hasn't read the book, I really hope if they do, they like it.
No, I think
Quite
lots of them
given
have read
away
it, and
Marmite, so I'm aware of that. But
yeah, yeah.
thank you so
We'll put this chat out on Noons because often it'll get a lot more views kind of after the event. So there'll be a lot of people who've read the book and will want to see it. So
thank you so much. And
we've
thank you
been
for
talking
everyone
about.
who.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. We've been talking about Wild Moon Rising, um, by Jenny Knight, published by ACAN Books, which is part of oh, yeah, that's what it really looks like. Which is part of HarperCollins, which is also my publisher. So big
Hey.
thanks to HarperCollins too. Oh yeah, so yeah, we there's loads of them out in the community. I think we had 100 that
Oh, oh wow. Thank you
yeah,
so much.
yeah, yeah. No, it's really amazing, isn't it, when your book first comes out to see it in other people's hands.
It's lovely. It's really, it makes all the time that I sat there writing it going, no one's going to read this, no one's going to want this, no one's going to buy this. It's beautiful to see. Thank you so much.
No, 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 they're reading it. They love it. And somebody's saying lovely cover art, which is true, which it should be given that it's all about an artist. It would have been, if you'd had a really terrible picture, that would have been great. Someone's up to
That's my
page
gig.
105. Good, Debs, are you liking it? Thumbs up. I really loved it. Anyway, I'm going to let you all go. I'm going to go back to all my Devon relatives who are downstairs waiting to be entertained. So I'm going to let you all go. And I hope to see lots of you
Thank
at the
you both so much.
noon circles next week. And we've still got a couple of places at the Wazing Retreat if anyone fancies coming to that on the
Yep.
18th of
Yep.
July.
Little thing. So we've just put up all the July circles. So please do go book your place in. We've got I think just like a very small number of wazing places. There's still an opportunity to save some money to go on a trip of a lifetime to Egypt. Check that out, all in events. And we've got some great new content coming up. And Nushin here, Nushin, wave your hand. There is a piece on the site. You can see it on our homepage that is about Nushin learning to fly. So
Yay!
go read that as well.
Oh, and one more Christmas party date is coming soon, Joe. We're in Albright next week for our first circle back there, and I'm going to chat them up and ask about the Christmas party. But I thought it was good to get our feet under the table first before I started going more Christmas party. And then the other thing is I'm interviewing Raina Wynn, and we're doing a private showing of the Salt Path in Oxford on the 10th of July with some money going to Crisis. Come, Jenny.
I'd
We have
love
to be
to.
there.
Love to. I'll be
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. Come. Hope to see lots there. Thank you. Thanks, Jen, for being in charge of it all. Thanks everybody for coming. Lots
Thanks,
of love. See you soon.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.